I never expected betrayal to look so quiet. No broken dishes, no screaming matches, just me in my Chicago apartment staring at her laptop. The messages weren't meant for me, but there they were. Some man called her baby, and she answered with mine. Two simple words, but they hit harder than a fist. In that moment, something inside me died. Not my love for her, but the version of me that believed in forever. I didn't confront her. I didn't wait for an explanation. I just picked up my truck keys, slid my wallet into my pocket, and walked out into the freezing night. No goodbye. No second chances. People imagine betrayal as fire. For me, it was silence. And that silence changed everything. Because once you've seen the truth written in someone else's words, you can never unsee it. That night, Michael Carter stopped being the man who forgave too easily. Numbness, no rage, just silence. I thought betrayal would feel like fire, burning hot, uncontrollable. But for me, it was ice. My chest went cold, my hands froze on the laptop, and my body refused to move. No screaming, no smashing plates, no demand for answers. Just silence. The kind of silence that presses on your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. I wanted to yell her name to drag the truth out of her to make her face me. But what good would that do? The messages were proof enough. Every word from him, every reply from her, carved themselves into me like a knife I couldn't pull out. I sat there staring at the glow of the screen, realizing that sometimes the worst pain doesn't explode outward. It seeps in quietly until it suffocates you. And in that suffocation, one question consumed me. If love was this fragile, what did I ever believe in? Keys in hand. Chicago at night. The apartment felt smaller with every second I stayed. Her perfume still lingered in the air, taunting me, daring me to break down. I didn't. I reached for my truck keys, the familiar weight settling into my palm like a final decision. My wallet slid into my back pocket, muscle memory more than thought. I didn't pack a bag, didn't grab a jacket. I just wanted out of that room, out of that life. When I opened the door, the cold Chicago wind hit me like a wall. It smelled of winter, of gasoline, and city grit. Streetlights painted the sidewalks in broken patterns, but I barely noticed. My boots hit the pavement harder than usual, every step saying what I couldn't. No confrontation, no explanation, just exit. I unlocked the truck, slid behind the wheel, and sat in the dark for a moment. Hands gripping the steering wheel chest tight, I whispered to myself, "Don't look back." Then I turned the key. Highway, faint radio, endless night. The engine growled to life louder than my own breathing. I pulled onto the highway, the city lights shrinking in the rear view, until Chicago was nothing but a blur of red and white streaks. The radio crackled with a late-night country station, someone singing about heartbreak and second chances. The words felt like they were aimed straight at me, but I turned the volume down until it was just a whisper background noise to drown out the silence. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, with every mile veins pressing against my skin. Knuckles pale in the dashboard glow. Traffic was thin, just a few trucks rumbling past their headlights, slicing through the darkness. I drove faster than I should have, like distance could erase what I saw on that screen. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, black ribbon on black night. And in that emptiness, one thought clung to me. If she was his, then who the hell was I? The words that wouldn't let go. The road stretched on, but my mind stayed trapped on that screen. Baby. That's what he called her. A word I used to whisper to her in the quiet of our nights, now stolen, handed to another man without hesitation. And worse, mine. She gave him that word, the word that once belonged to me. 2 syllables, but they carried the weight of betrayal, heavier than any blow. They looped in my head like a broken record, echoing louder than the tires humming beneath me. Baby, mine. Baby, mine. The kind of words that should make you feel wanted, safe chosen, until you realize they were never meant for you. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, eyes burning but dry. I couldn't cry. Not yet. I just drove faster as if outrunning those 2 words was possible. But deep down, I knew the truth they'd follow me wherever I went. The death inside. Somewhere between mile markers, something in me broke. Not loudly, not with a crash or a scream, but with a quiet finality, like a light switched off in a dark room. It wasn't my love for her that died that night. Love doesn't disappear that easily. What died was the man who believed in loyalty, in vows, in forever. That version of me, the one who thought promises meant permanence, took his last breath behind the wheel of that truck. I could feel it, a hollowness settling into my chest, an emptiness where trust used to live. The road blurred in front of me, headlights stretching into infinity, but inside I was collapsing. They say heartbreak changes you, but they never mention the funeral you hold for the man you used to be. And as I drove deeper into the night, I realized I wasn't just leaving her behind. I was burying myself too. A door in the dark. By the time I pulled off the highway, the city was miles behind me, but the weight in my chest hadn't lifted. I didn't know where else to go, so I drove toward the only person who might not ask questions, Tom, a guy from work. We weren't close, not the kind of friends who shared secrets, but I remembered his place was only a few blocks off the route. It was nearly midnight when I parked outside his small brick house. My headlights cut across his lawn before I killed the engine. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the porch light, glowing faintly like a beacon. My hand shook as I walked up the steps. Every knock of my fist against his door echoed louder than my heartbeat. I half expected him not to answer, to leave me standing there with nothing but the night. But then I heard footsteps on the other side. The couch. The door creaked open, and there was Tom. Hair, messy eyes, heavy with sleep, standing in a faded t-shirt and sweatpants. For a second, I couldn't speak. The words jammed in my throat, my pride choking me. He looked at me, then past me, as if he already knew something was wrong. I muttered, I need a place tonight. That was all. No details, no explanations. Tom didn't ask. He just stepped aside, motioned toward the living room, and said, "Couch is yours." The relief hit harder than I expected. I dropped my keys on the coffee table, collapsed onto the sofa that smelled faintly of old leather and dust. Tom disappeared back down the hallway without another word. The silence wasn't awkward. It was mercy. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, realizing sometimes the greatest kindness isn't advice or pity. It's simply space to fall apart quietly. Deleting her, the couch springs groaned beneath me as I shifted, searching for sleep that wouldn't come. Tom's house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every thought louder. My phone buzzed on the table, her name still pinned to the top of my messages. For a long moment, I just stared at it, thumb hovering above the screen. Part of me wanted to hear her voice, to demand answers, to make her feel even a fraction of the wreckage she left behind. But another part knew that if I called, I'd lose myself completely. My thumb shook as I scrolled to her number. Delete contact. The question blinked back at me, simple but brutal. I pressed yes. Just like that, years of late-night talks, inside jokes, and promises reduced to digital dust. The screen went dark, but the hole in my chest stayed wide open. I lay back, phone heavy in my hand, whispering to no one, "She's gone." The ceiling. The house was silent, but inside my head, it was chaos. I lay flat on Tom's couch, the leather cold against my skin, my eyes locked on the ceiling above me. The ceiling fan spun in lazy circles, blades slicing through the air with a soft hum, but it couldn't drown out the noise in my chest. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to shut down. Every blink replayed the messages I'd seen, each word etched like graffiti I couldn't scrub off. I tried counting the spins of the fan, tried listening to the faint ticking of a clock down the hall, but nothing pulled me closer to sleep. The longer I stared upward, the heavier my chest became, like gravity had shifted to press all its weight on me alone. I realized then this wouldn't be just one sleepless night. This was the beginning of many, and tomorrow I'd have to face it all again. Leaving Chicago. Starting over in Austin. By the end of that week, Chicago no longer felt like home. Every street corner carried her shadow. Every diner, every familiar sidewalk whispered our memories back at me. I couldn't breathe in a city that reminded me of her with every turn. So I packed what little I had, some clothes, a toolbox, a few photos I couldn't bring myself to throw away, and loaded it all into my pickup. No grand plan, no perfect destination, just distance. Austin, Texas seemed as good a place as any. Warm weather, work, and construction, a city big enough to disappear in but small enough to feel new. I drove south for hours, watching the skyline shrink in my rear view until all I saw were endless highways and open sky. By the time I crossed into Texas, I wasn't Michael from Chicago anymore. I was just a man trying to rebuild 1 mile at a time. A job with broken walls. Austin greeted me with heat dust and the scent of fresh asphalt. I didn't know anyone didn't have a plan beyond survival. The first morning, I walked into a hardware store with my resume scribbled on a single sheet of paper and calloused hands that spoke louder than words. By the end of the week, I landed a spot with a small crew that specialized in renovating old houses, places falling apart at the seams, waiting for someone stubborn enough to bring them back to life. My first job was a cracked Victorian with peeling paint and sagging floors. As I hammered out rotten boards and ripped down broken drywall, something clicked. The work was rough, dirty, endless, but strangely comforting. Every wall I tore down felt like a piece of myself I could finally let go. And every nail I drove into fresh wood whispered the same promise: maybe rebuilding wasn't just for houses. Maybe it was for me, too. The first swing of the sledgehammer echoed through the empty house louder than I expected. Plaster cracked, wood splintered, and dust exploded into the air, filling my lungs, clinging to my skin. I kept swinging again and again until the old wall finally gave way, collapsing into a pile of broken panels at my feet. The air was thick, choking, but I didn't stop. Sweat stung my eyes, dust coated my hair, and my arms trembled from the effort, yet it felt right. Every strike was more than demolition. It was release. With each blow, I imagined tearing down the lies, the promises she shattered, the version of me that once trusted too easily. The wall wasn't just wood and nails. It was my past standing in my way, daring me to keep carrying it. And when it finally fell, the silence that followed felt like freedom, even if just for a moment. For the first time, I could breathe. Smashing the past. I stood over the rubble chest, heaving hands blistered around the sledgehammer. Dust floated in the sunlight, cutting through the cracked windows, turning the air into a haze of gold and gray. I stared at the pile of broken plaster and wood, and the thought hit me: this is what it feels like to destroy the past. Every swing, every crack, every piece collapsing to the floor was more than just labor. It was a funeral for the man I used to be. The lies, the trust, the blind faith I had pounded them into dust. And yet, even as the wall lay in ruins, part of me still felt its weight pressing down. Maybe you can break a wall in a day, but breaking what someone did to your heart, that takes longer. Still, I gripped the hammer tighter, telling myself I'd keep swinging until the day my chest felt as light as this room. Country nights and cold beer. That night, I found myself sitting on a worn-out stool in a dim Austin bar, the kind with neon signs buzzing and peanut shells scattered on the floor. A bottle of beer sweated in my hand, colder than the room around me. On the jukebox, an old George Strait song drifted through the smoke and chatter, each lyric about heartbreak cutting a little too close. The bar was full enough to feel alive, but empty enough that no one noticed me. I watched couples laugh over pool games, friends clinking glasses, strangers sharing stories. I didn't join in. I just sat there drinking in silence, letting the music talk for me. Every note, every drawl of the steel guitar reminded me I wasn't the first man to lose everything in a single night. But knowing that didn't make it easier. I tipped the bottle back and thought maybe pain feels lighter when drowned in country songs. The lie about time. I sat there nursing my second beer, watching the bubbles crawl to the top, and a thought struck me. People always say time heals all wounds, but that's a lie we tell ourselves to make it through the night. Time doesn't heal. Time just teaches you how to wear the mask better, how to hide the ache behind a steady voice and a polite smile. Maybe in a year, no one will see the cracks. Maybe they'll think I moved on, but underneath the wound stays open, hidden beneath layers of small talk and routine. I tilted the bottle, listening to the glass clink against my teeth, and wondered if anyone else in that bar carried the same invisible scar. Maybe that's why country songs hit so hard they don't heal you. They just remind you that your pain has company. I swallowed the last drop and told myself the truth. Healing isn't coming, only hiding. Neighbors, but not friends. The first week in Austin, people tried to be kind. The woman next door brought over a pie, warm and sweet, her smile genuine as she introduced herself. A man across the street waved while mowing his lawn, calling out, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Even the mailman lingered a second longer, asking if I needed directions around town. They all meant well, and for a brief moment I wanted to step into their kindness, to accept it like a lifeline. But I couldn't. I forced a smile, thanked them politely, then shut my door before the conversations could go further. Distance felt safer. Letting people in meant risking more cracks, more betrayal, and I couldn't afford another fracture, so I stayed behind my walls, both the ones I built in houses and the ones I built inside myself. They thought they were meeting their new neighbor. In truth, they were shaking hands with a ghost. Aisles of emptiness. Saturday came and I found myself pushing a cart through the fluorescent aisles of a Texas supermarket. Families filled the space, kids begging for cereal, couples debating over brands of coffee, friends laughing near the deli. Their noise echoed off the walls, but for me, it only made the silence in my chest louder. I walked past shelves stacked high with choices, but every item felt hollow, stripped of meaning, when there was no one waiting at home to share it. I reached for a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a six-pack of beer essentials for survival, not for living. As I moved through the crowd, I realized no one noticed me. Not really. I was just another man filling a cart, blending into the background. But inside, I felt like a stranger in a life I used to recognize. That's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't just follow you home. It follows you everywhere. Missing the illusion, nights were the hardest. The silence of my small apartment pressed against me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I'd lie in bed staring into the dark, and her face would appear, not the woman who betrayed me, but the one I used to believe she was. The one who laughed at my bad jokes, who curled against me during storms, who swore she'd never let go. I didn't miss her voice, not really. I missed the illusion, the version of her I had built in my mind, polished with trust and painted with promises. That ghost haunted me more than she ever could. Because how do you grieve someone who's still alive but no longer exists? In the form you knew, I turned on the lamp, rubbed my eyes, and realized the truth. I wasn't mourning Emily. I was mourning the man who thought she was real. Ink and survival. After too many sleepless nights, I bought a cheap notebook from a corner store. Nothing special, just lined paper and a flimsy cover, but it became the only place I could set the weight down. Every night I opened it on the kitchen table, pen in hand, and poured out words I couldn't say to anyone else. I wrote about the messages I saw, the silence that followed, the way her absence clung to me like a shadow. Some entries were angry, messy scribbles that tore through the page. Others were quiet confessions, questions I knew would never be answered. Writing didn't fix the pain, but it kept me from drowning in it. The pages became a mirror I could shout into without judgment. And as the notebook filled, I realized I wasn't just recording my heartbreak. I was mapping out the slow, uneven process of surviving it one sentence at a time. A year of work. 1 year slipped by in the rhythm of hammers and sawdust. What started as just a way to pay rent slowly became something more. My hands, once clumsy with new tools, grew steady, precise. I learned how to level crooked floors, patch broken roofs, breathe life back into houses everyone else had given up on. Clients began to ask for me by name. My crew trusted me with bigger jobs, harder projects. I carried scars on my knuckles, paint on my jeans, and calluses that felt like armor. Somewhere in the mess of wood and nails, I discovered a kind of pride I hadn't felt in years. The work didn't erase the past, but it gave me something the past couldn't, proof that I could still build, still create, still matter. And though nights were still heavy, the days at least gave me a reason to get up. For the first time, I felt useful again. From ruin to shelter, there was one house I'll never forget. A sagging old frame on the edge of town roof, caved in, windows shattered, floors soft with rot. Most people saw it as a lost cause. But week after week, my crew and I tore it apart and stitched it back together. We replaced beams, laid new flooring, painted walls, until they glowed. By the end of the project, the house didn't just stand, it welcomed. Warm light spilled from the windows, laughter echoed from the family who moved in, and the smell of fresh wood carried through the air. I stood on the curb, wiping sweat from my forehead, staring at what had once been ruins. It hit me then, maybe I wasn't fixed, not yet, but this house was proof that broken things could be rebuilt. And maybe if I kept going one day, I'd walk inside myself and feel that same warmth again. Pride with a hollow center. The day the family moved into that house, they hugged me like I had given them a gift. Their kids ran through the rooms, their laughter bouncing off the fresh walls, filling the space with life. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud, like I'd actually built something that mattered. I stood on the porch, watching them settle in, and a smile crept onto my face. But the moment I got back into my truck, The smile faded. Pride didn't silence the emptiness. I had poured myself into bricks and lumber, yet inside there was still a hollow place no hammer or nail could touch. Driving home, I realized fixing houses was easier than fixing myself. You can measure wood, replace drywall, seal leaks. But how do you patch up the cracks in your own chest? That question lingered with me louder than any saw or drill as the night swallowed the road ahead. Watching what I lost. On weekends, I'd stop by a diner after work, still in my dusty boots and paint-stained jeans. That's where I noticed it most, the loneliness. Across the booths, couples leaned close, sharing bites of pie, laughing at secrets only they knew. On the sidewalks outside, hands intertwined as if the world couldn't touch them. Even in the grocery store, I'd catch sight of wedding rings flashing under the lights as husbands and wives debated over dinner plans. Each small moment hit like a jab to the ribs. Not because I wanted her back, but because I wanted what I thought I had, a partner who was mine and only mine. I sipped my coffee, pretending the bitterness masked the ache, but the truth was harder to swallow. I wasn't jealous of them. I was mourning the fact that once I thought I belonged in that picture too. Now I was just a man eating alone. One night after a late job, I took the long way home, steering my truck toward the river. The bridge stretched out like a ribbon of steel lights flickering across the water below. I rolled the windows down, letting the night air rush in. The wind was sharp cold enough to sting my skin, but I welcomed it. It felt honest. No lies, no sweet words turned sour, just the truth of the night pressing against me. As I crossed the span, memories rose with the wind. I saw us driving together once, her hand resting on mine, music humming low, both of us believing in forever. Now it was just me, knuckles white on the wheel, holding on to nothing but the silence. The river glimmered dark beneath me, carrying away reflections of city lights. And for a split second, I wondered if the current could carry my pain too, if only it were that simple. Roads we once traveled. As the truck rolled over the bridge, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting to the roads Emily and I once traveled together. Weekend trips to Wisconsin, her feet on the dashboard, hair blowing wild through the open window. We'd laugh at nothing, sing along to songs we barely knew, convinced that the world couldn't touch us. I remembered her leaning against me at gas stations, sipping bad coffee, teasing me for never asking for directions. Those memories used to feel like treasure. Now they cut like glass. Every scene played out in my head with cruel precision, reminding me that what I thought was real had an expiration date. The miles we drove together were still burned into me, but now they felt borrowed, like I'd been living in someone else's story. I tightened my grip on the wheel, whispering into the empty cab. Was any of it real, or was it all rehearsal for goodbye, the weight of my own trust? People always ask if heartbreak turns into hate. The truth, I don't hate Emily, not even after everything. What I hate is myself, my blind faith, my refusal to see the cracks that were already there. I replay moments when she pulled away, when her eyes drifted somewhere else, and I told myself it was nothing. I chose trust over suspicion, loyalty over doubt. I thought that made me strong. Turns out it just made me easy to break. Sitting behind the wheel that night, I felt the weight of my own choices pressing down harder than her betrayal ever could. Because betrayal only hurts once. But realizing you handed someone the power to destroy you, that pain lingers. I don't hate her for using the knife. I hate myself for putting it in her hands and smiling while she held it. Keeping it from my parents. I never told my parents. Not once. To them, I was just busy starting fresh in a new city, chasing work and opportunity. When they called, I put on a steady voice, asked about their health, their garden, their church friends. I kept the conversation safe, light, like nothing inside me had shattered. Part of me wanted to confess, to hear my mother's voice soften, to hear my father offer the kind of advice only time-worn men can give. But I couldn't. I didn't want pity in their eyes or worry in their voices. I wanted to protect them from the heaviness I carried, even if it meant carrying it alone. So I lied by omission. Every phone call, a performance, every visit cut short. They thought I was rebuilding my life out of ambition. They never knew I was really just patching up the ruins of myself, one unanswered question at a time. Silent with my best friend. I didn't tell my best friend either. The guy who stood beside me at my wedding, the one who knew every story from high school to now. If anyone deserved to know, it was him. But each time his name lit up my phone, I let it ring until it stopped. I convinced myself I'd call back later when I could speak without my voice cracking. Later never came. Friendship means honesty, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words, "She cheated. She's gone. I'm broken." I imagined his reaction, anger on my behalf, maybe a joke to lighten the weight, a promise of a night out with too much whiskey. But what I couldn't stomach was the look of pity that would follow the way even he might see me as less than the man I used to be. So I stayed silent, shutting him out, proving that heartbreak doesn't just steal your love, it steals your voice. Carrying it alone. In the end, I carried it alone, not because there weren't people willing to listen, but because the truth felt too heavy to hand over. It was mine, the betrayal, the silence, the long nights staring at ceilings. Sharing it would have meant reliving it, explaining it, watching someone else flinch at the ugliness I already knew by heart. So I locked it inside like a box, shoved into the corner of an attic, dusty and untouched, but always there. Some days the weight was unbearable. Other days I wore it like armor, convincing myself it made me stronger. But deep down, I knew the truth. Carrying it alone didn't make me a survivor. It made me a prisoner. And every morning when I laced up my boots, I felt the chains. Yet still I chose silence, because admitting the pain out loud felt scarier than living with it in the dark. The heat of Saturday. It was a Saturday in the middle of a Texas summer, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin and makes the air feel heavy. I'd spent the whole day sanding floors in an old bungalow, sweat dripping from my chin sawdust, clinging to my arms like a second layer of skin. By the time I pulled into my driveway, all I wanted was a cold shower and a quiet evening. The sun was still blazing low, but relentless, painting everything in a harsh, golden glare. I cut the engine, grabbed my toolbox from the truck bed, and felt the boards of my porch creak under my boots. For once, I thought maybe the day would end in peace. No memories. No ghosts, just exhaustion and silence. But life has a way of saving its cruelest surprises for the moments you feel safest. That was the day the past came back uninvited to stand on my doorstep. Dust and paint. I dropped my toolbox by the porch steps and tugged off my work gloves. The leather peeled away, slowly sticking to my palms, damp with sweat. My hands were stained with paint, fingertips raw from a week's worth of sanding and hammering. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the grit of sawdust still clinging to my skin. My shirt was streaked with dirt and sweat, the kind of mess that comes from a full day of honest work. Standing there in the fading light, I felt worn down but steady. For once, the exhaustion felt clean-earned. I set the gloves on the railing and wiped my palms on my jeans, ready to unlock the door and let the silence swallow me. And that's when I heard it, the low rumble of tires on gravel behind me. A car pulling up where no one ever came. My shoulders stiffened, my breath caught. Something in me already knew peace wouldn't last. The car behind me. The key was already in the lock when I heard it, the crunch of tires rolling slow over the gravel drive. My porch light flickered against the hood of a car easing to a stop just a few feet behind me. Out here, nobody just drops by. Neighbors wave from a distance. Deliveries leave boxes at the gate. But this was different. The engine idled for a moment, humming like a warning in the thick evening air. My hand froze on the doorknob. Breath caught in my throat. 100 thoughts flashed at once. Maybe a lost traveler, maybe someone from work. But deep down, something colder whispered the truth. Ghosts don't stay buried forever. I turned slowly, the heat pressing against my back, my chest tight as the headlights dimmed. A door creaked open, footsteps on gravel. And then a voice I hadn't heard in over a year, cutting through the night like a blade. Her voice in the dark, Michael. The sound of my name cracked through the night, soft but sharp enough to stop me cold. I hadn't heard that voice in over a year, but my body recognized it instantly. My spine stiffened, my pulse kicked hard against my ribs. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, the kind of cruel trick memory plays when the past refuses to stay buried. But then I heard it again, trembling closer this time. I turned slowly, and there she was, Emily. Standing in the glow of the porch light, smaller somehow, shoulders hunched as if the world had finally crushed her. Her hair was messy, eyes rimmed red, hands shaking as she clutched something to her chest. I didn't say a word, didn't move. The silence between us stretched tight, filled with all the things I could have shouted but chose not to. She had shattered me once. I wasn't about to give her that power again. Face to face again. I turned slowly as if giving myself time to prepare for a punch I knew was coming. And there she was, Emily, The woman who once held my future in her hands now stood trembling at the edge of my porch. Her eyes were swollen red like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her hands shook as though even standing still took effort. She looked smaller, not physically, but in spirit, like a house with its windows shattered, standing but no longer whole. My chest tightened, not from longing, but from recognition of what was gone. The Emily in front of me wasn't the one I once loved. That version had disappeared with the words I read on her screen. What stood before me was just the aftermath. She whispered my name again, but I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch, let it weigh heavy between us. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than any words ever could. The weight of silence. I stayed rooted where I stood, arms at my sides, the porch boards creaking under my weight. My throat burned with words I could have unleashed questions, accusations, maybe even curses, but none of them left my lips. Instead, I let silence carry the truth. My stillness told her what my voice didn't need, that I had nothing left to give her, not even anger. Her eyes searched mine, desperate for a crack, for a hint of the man who once bent over backwards to forgive. But that man was gone, buried miles behind me on a highway out of Chicago. The night air pressed heavy cicadas buzzing in the distance, yet between us it was quiet enough to hear her shaky breath. She shifted her weight, clutching something tighter against her chest. And for the first time, I realized this meeting wasn't accidental. She came here with a purpose, and she wasn't leaving until she said it. Her hands fumbled as she pulled something from her purse, the edges worn, corners bent. She held it out like proof of a story only we had lived. A photograph. Us 2 years younger, standing on a pier by Lake Michigan. My arm around her shoulders, her smile wide and careless, mine, just as sure. Sunlight glinted off the water behind us, and in that moment, frozen on paper, we looked untouchable. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. That photo had once lived on our fridge, pinned with a magnet shaped like a heart. Now it was faded, creased from being carried too long in the wrong hands. Emily's fingers shook as she held it toward me, her eyes brimming. "Remember this?" she whispered. Of course I remembered. That day was carved into me. But the man in that photo had been buried long ago. And, looking at it now, felt less like nostalgia, more like a cruel reminder of everything we lost. Her confession. Her voice cracked as the words tumbled out, raw and jagged. "I ruined everything." She clutched the photo tighter, as if squeezing the past could somehow glue it back together. Tears streamed down her face, catching the glow of the porch light, turning her brokenness into something almost unbearable to look at. I stood still, arms crossed, the weight of her confession pressing against me like a wave. For a moment, I wanted to believe her, to let those words erase the late nights I spent choking on silence. But apologies don't travel backward. They don't unwrite the messages on that screen or resurrect the man who believed in forever. She sobbed harder, shoulders shaking, her voice small and splintered. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to see you, to say I'm sorry." I swallowed hard, jaw clenched, because the truth was simple. Sorry doesn't rebuild what you chose to burn. Armored heart. I crossed my arms over my chest the way a soldier braces before battle. My stance, said what I refused to put into words. I was here, but I wasn't open. She kept talking, her voice breaking, eyes darting from the photo to my face as if begging for permission to keep going. Once I would have rushed to comfort her, pulled her close, wiped the tears away before they could fall. But that version of me was gone, buried under the rubble of her choices. Now every word she spoke bounced off the armor I had spent a year forging. Pain had hardened me, taught me that silence could protect more than any shield. I listened because it cost me nothing. But inside, my heart stayed guarded, locked behind walls she no longer had the key to. She wanted redemption. I gave her distance. That was all I had left to offer. An audience of strangers. Her sobs weren't quiet. In the still heat of that Texas evening, every cry carried down the street. I noticed curtains shift, blinds crack open, porch lights flicker on as neighbors peeked out to see the scene unfolding. A woman clutched her child a little tighter. A man watering his lawn let the hose run, idle eyes fixed on us. Emily's voice, broken and pleading, echoed across the block, and for a moment we were a spectacle, an unwilling performance for people hungry for drama. But I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them draw their own conclusions. Their curiosity meant nothing compared to the storm between us. I stood firm, arms crossed, eyes locked on the woman who once called me hers. She wanted an audience for her apology, maybe sympathy for her regret. But I wasn't there to play a part in her redemption story. I wasn't her comfort anymore. I was just the man she broke. Left behind, her shoulders slumped as if the words themselves weighed her down. "He left me," she whispered, barely lifting her eyes to meet mine. The confession cracked something in her voice, a raw edge that made the silence around us thicken. For a split second, I felt the sting of irony. She had traded in loyalty for excitement, stability for thrill, and in the end, she was left holding nothing. He said he wasn't ready, that he never wanted to commit. Her voice trembled, each word spilling like shards of glass onto the porch between us. She pressed the photo tighter against her chest, as though clinging to proof that once she had been chosen. I stayed still, my arms crossed, jaw set. Inside, I wasn't surprised. I had seen it coming the moment I read those messages. What shocked me wasn't that he left. It was that she thought telling me would matter. Too late to realize. Her voice cracked again, trembling as she forced the words out. "I thought I wanted more," she said, eyes glistening under the porch light. "But you were the more." The sentence hung between us heavy and desperate, like a lifeline tossed across a river too wide to cross. She shook her head, wiping tears with the back of her trembling hand. I thought I was chasing something better, something bigger. But it was nothing. Empty. All I did was trade love for an illusion. And by the time I realized it, you were gone. She stepped closer, holding the photo out as if it were proof of her revelation. My chest tightened, not with longing, but with the bitter taste of irony. Once those words would have been everything to me, but now they were just ashes blown in too late. Truth doesn't heal when it arrives after the fire. It only stings like smoke in old wounds. Begging for a conversation. Emily's sobs grew heavier, raw, and uncontrollable, shaking her small frame. She held the photo against her chest like it was the last piece of proof she had, that once we were real. "Please, Michael," she choked, her words tangled in tears. "Just talk to me. Just 5 minutes. A coffee. A seat on the porch. Anything." Her voice broke into fragments, her hands reaching out but stopping short, as if she knew I wouldn't take them. The neighbors were still watching their silhouettes, framed in half-open blinds, but she didn't seem to care anymore. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her body folding under the weight of her regret. "I just need you to listen. I just need you to see me," she pleaded. I stood firm, chest tight, arms still crossed, heart wrapped in steel. Once her tears would have undone me. Now they were only reminders of the storm I had already survived. The question that burned inside. A fire roared. Every fiber of me wanted to shout, to grab her by the shoulders and shake the answer out of her. Why? Why wasn't I enough? Why trade love for betrayal? Why destroy the one thing I thought we were building together? The question burned on my tongue, ready to rip free, ready to tear through the fragile silence between us. My jaw clenched, teeth grinding, breath sharp, but I didn't let it out. I swallowed the word whole, forced it back down into the pit of my chest, where it clawed and raged like a caged animal. Because even if she gave me an answer, it wouldn't be enough. No explanation could glue back the man I used to be. So I stood still, letting the unspoken why suffocate me from the inside, while on the outside I gave her nothing but the same silence I left her with a year ago. Haunted by happiness, her tears pulled me backward whether I wanted them to or not. Suddenly, I was drowning in flashes of the life we once had. The sound of her laughter filling our kitchen, the way her hand fit perfectly into mine during long drives, lazy Sundays tangled in sheets, while sunlight poured through the blinds. For a split second, I felt that ache, the dangerous pull of wanting to believe her, to step back into the comfort of what we used to be. The memories were soft, seductive whispering that maybe forgiveness could bring them back. But then, as quickly as they came, the images shattered against the reality in front of me. Her swollen eyes, the broken voice, the undeniable truth that she had chosen someone else. Happiness was a ghost, one that looked beautiful from a distance, but disappeared when you reached out to touch it. I let the memories sting, then shoved them back where they belonged, behind me. The real reason I left, the pull of those memories nearly broke me, but then the truth cut through like a blade. I didn't walk away because my love ran dry. I walked away because hers did. That was the difference, one that mattered more than all her tears, more than all her words now. Love isn't supposed to be begged for, bargained over, or stolen back after it's thrown away. I had loved her enough to fight, but she had stopped loving me enough to stay. That night in Chicago, I wasn't leaving out of anger. I was leaving out of respect for myself, for the man I refused to let die chasing scraps of affection. And, standing on that porch, staring at the woman who once called me hers, I realized nothing had changed. Her voice trembled with regret, but regret isn't love. It never has been, and it never will be. The line that drew the wall. I finally let my arms fall just enough to uncross them, just enough to let the words through. My voice came out steady, sharper than I intended, but honest. I spent a year rebuilding myself. I said each syllable measured like a hammer striking a nail. And you expect to walk back in like nothing broke. Her face collapsed at the words, her mouth trembling open, then shutting again when no excuse came. The porch light buzzed faintly above us, the night heavy with silence. But inside me, it felt like thunder. That sentence wasn't just for her, it was for me. It was the line I needed to say out loud, the truth that sealed the gap between who I was and who I had become. She wanted forgiveness to be a bridge. But my words made it clear there was no bridge anymore, only distance carved deep and permanent between her world and mine. Her own ruin. She lowered the photo, her arms dropping as if the weight was too much to hold. Her voice trembled softer now, stripped of all defense. "I know something broke me," she whispered. The words floated into the thick night air, fragile as glass. For the first time, I believed her, not because she said it with conviction, but because I could see it etched into the lines of her face, the slump of her shoulders, the way her eyes darted like someone searching for pieces she'd never find. She wasn't the woman who betrayed me anymore. She was something smaller, cracked, hollowed out by her own choices. But her brokenness didn't move me the way she wanted. It didn't ignite pity or spark forgiveness. Instead, it drew a hard line in my chest. She had shattered me once, but now she was standing in the ruins of herself. And that wasn't my burden to rebuild. Not anymore. As her words hung in the air, something clicked inside me. She wasn't here because she missed me. Not really. She missed the version of me that would have crumbled at her tears, the man who would have pulled her close, whispered that everything could be fixed. She missed the fool who mistook forgiveness for strength, who handed her his heart again and again, no matter how carelessly she held it. But that man was gone. He died the night I read those messages buried on a cold highway out of Chicago. What stood here now was different, harder, sharper, maybe lonelier, but stronger too. She looked at me like she was searching for the old Michael hiding under my skin, but he wasn't there. All she saw was the truth. I wasn't her safe place anymore. I wasn't her second chance. I was the proof that some bridges once burned never get rebuilt. Tears without shelter, her knees buckled as if the weight of her own regret finally dragged her down. She dropped onto the porch steps, sobs tearing out of her chest, hands covering her face. The sound was raw, jagged, almost unbearable to hear. Once it would have ripped me apart. Once I would have knelt beside her, pulled her into my arms, promised her it would be okay, even when I wasn't sure myself. But not now. I stayed standing, arms heavy at my sides, heart locked behind the walls I had spent a year rebuilding. This time, her tears weren't mine to catch. They belonged to her choices, her losses, her ghosts. The neighbors' windows glowed faintly, still watching, but their stares didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time, I wasn't her savior, her safety net, her forgiveness. I was simply the man who refused to carry her sorrow anymore. She wept alone, and I let her. The last words I owed her, I let the silence stretch until her sobs softened into shallow breaths. Then, for the first time that night, I spoke. My voice was low, steady, almost foreign to my own ears. "I wish you peace," I said. Her head jerked up, eyes swollen, searching my face for something more. Anger, softness, a crack in the armor. But there was none. Just truth. "I hope you learn to love." I continued, pausing without hurting first. The words hung between us, not sharp, not cruel, but final. They weren't a knife meant to cut her down. They were a door, closing gently, firmly behind me. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to argue, to beg again, but no sound came. For once, I didn't feel the need to explain or justify. I wasn't speaking for her anymore. I was speaking for me. And with those words, I gave back what she could never return, my peace. Her silence at last. For the first time since she arrived, she stopped talking. No pleas, no apologies, no desperate promises. Just silence. Her shoulders sagged as though my words had stripped the last bit of fight from her. Slowly she rose from the porch step, the photo still clutched in her trembling hand. She looked at me one last time, eyes wet, lips parting like she might speak, but nothing came. Instead, she turned her movements heavy, deliberate, like each step cost her more than she could afford. Gravel crunched beneath her shoes as she walked back toward the car. I didn't follow. I didn't call her name. I just stood there watching the woman who once shattered me now retreat into the night, carrying nothing but regret. When she opened the driver's side door, she hesitated for a heartbeat, as if waiting for me to stop her. But I stayed still. I had already said everything I needed to. Headlights fading. The engine coughed to life, headlights spilling across my yard in a blinding wash of white. She sat there for a moment, hands gripping the wheel, her silhouette framed in the glow. Then, with a slow press of the pedal, the car rolled backward, crunching over gravel before turning toward the road. I watched the taillights flare red, glowing like two dying embers in the dark. They grew smaller with every second, shrinking down the street until they disappeared around the corner. The sound of her engine lingered a little longer, then faded too, swallowed by the night. And just like that, she was gone again. Only this time, I didn't feel the urge to chase her. No desperation, no questions left unasked, just stillness, the kind that follows after a storm when the air is heavy but clear. The car vanished into the distance, and with it the last of what she once meant to me. Closing the door, when the last trace of her car disappeared, I finally moved. My boots felt heavy as I stepped back across the porch, each board groaning under the weight of everything that had just unfolded. I reached for the handle, pushed the door open, and crossed the threshold into the quiet of my small wooden house. The familiar smell of sawdust and paint clung to the air, grounding me in the life I had built here. With one slow motion, I pulled the door shut. The latch clicked firm in final sealing the night and her on the other side. For a moment, I stood there, hand still resting on the knob, listening to the silence fill the room. It wasn't empty silence, not anymore. It was mine. No apologies, no explanations, no ghosts slipping through cracks. Just four walls, a roof, and the steady beat of my own heart reminding me this was where I lived now. Leaning on the door. The moment the latch clicked shut, my body gave in. I pressed my back against the door, the wood cool against my shoulders, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It rushed out of me, hard, ragged, like I'd been carrying her weight in my lungs the whole time. My chest rose and fell, each breath heavy, uneven, almost trembling. The silence inside the house wrapped around me, thick but not suffocating. For once, the quiet felt earned. I closed my eyes, head tipping back against the frame, and let the exhaustion wash over me. My arms hung limp at my sides, fingers still trembling from holding myself together on that porch. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It was more like release, the kind that comes after you've carried something too far, too long, and finally set it down. For the first time all night, I could breathe again. The ache of letting go. My chest ached, a deep, pulsing pain that made me press a hand against my ribs as if I could hold it steady. But I knew it wasn't love clawing at me. That part of me had burned out long ago, smothered by betrayal and silence. What I felt now was different. It was the weight of release, the sting that comes when chains finally fall away and leave bruises behind. Love is supposed to hurt when it ends, but this wasn't that. This was the ache of carrying grief for too long, of setting it down and realizing how heavy it had been. My heart wasn't breaking anymore. It was stretching raw and sore, trying to beat in a new rhythm without her shadow pressing on it. The pain wasn't proof that I still loved her. It was proof that I had finally let her go, and letting go hurts in its own way. The weight of release. I stayed there against the door hand pressed to my chest, and the truth settled in. The pain wasn't from love. It was from letting go. For so long, I carried her ghost, convinced that if I held on tightly enough, I'd find some kind of closure, some neat ending that made sense of it all. But tonight proved something I'd been too stubborn to admit. Closure doesn't come from the one who hurt you. It comes the moment you decide you don't need it anymore. And that decision cut deeper than any goodbye. It was the funeral I'd avoided, the burial of a version of myself that had been chained to her memory. Letting go didn't feel like freedom at first. It felt like grief. But as the ache spread through my chest, I understood what it really was, proof that the weight was no longer mine to carry. I had finally laid it down. The end of needing answers. For months, maybe years, I thought I needed her to explain why she did it, why I wasn't enough, why promises meant so little when temptation knocked. I believed if she said the right words, the wound would finally close. But standing there tonight, I realized the opposite was true. Her words didn't matter. Her tears didn't matter. None of it could rewrite the story. I didn't need her answers. I didn't need her reasons. I didn't even need her apology. All I needed was to finally unclench my fists, to let go of the pain I'd carried like a second skin. So I breathed deep and released it all, the grief, the questions, the ache of needing closure from someone who could never give it. In that release, I felt something shift inside me. Not a roar, not a burst of light, just a quiet loosening. The end wasn't hers to grant. It was mine to claim. Peace at last. As the weight slid off my shoulders, what filled the space surprised me. Not emptiness, not despair, but quiet. A stillness that felt different from the suffocating silence I'd carried for so long. This was softer, lighter, almost tender. For the first time since that night in Chicago, I felt peace, not the kind you chase in bottles or bury under work, but the kind that settles in your bones when you finally stop fighting what's already gone. My breathing slowed steady and calm, matching the rhythm of the house around me. The creak of old wood, the faint hum of the fridge, the simple sounds of a life that was mine alone. Peace didn't come like a flood or a thunderclap. It came like a whisper, gentle and sure, reminding me that survival wasn't about holding on. It was about letting go. And in that moment, I knew I'd finally done it. The light through the window, I pushed off the door and walked slowly toward the window. Outside, the Texas evening stretched wide, the sky painted in strokes of gold and fading crimson. Sunlight spilled through the glass, casting long, warm lines across the wooden floor. I stood there, hands resting on the sill, breathing in the quiet of a house that was finally mine. Not ours, not haunted, just mine. For the first time, I didn't feel her shadow at my back. I didn't feel the ache of unanswered questions. I felt the steady calm of a man who had carried his pain to the very end and then set it down. The camera would linger on the soft glow over my shoulders as my voice carried one final line. I already had what I was looking for: peace. And to everyone watching, I'll say this: if you've ever carried the same weight, if you've ever finally let go, comment just one word: peace.